Okay, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. My name is Janie Montblanc, and on behalf of the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange and our partners, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, What are Fuel Breaks and Why Are We Doing Them? Presented by Jeff Rose and Jolie Pollet with the Bureau of Land Management and Duncan Leao with the Forest Service. This webinar is the first in our Fuel Break series that will run every week through the end of April. So let me show you that. Here's our flyer. You can find details about this series on our website at greatbasinfirescience.org, and Corey will also put the link in the chat. Before I introduce our presenters, I'll go over some webinar details. We're now using Zoom Webinar as our platform, and while we like every other aspect of Zoom Webinar, the one missing feature is that attendees can't see other attendees. So if you would like, please share your name and affiliation in the chat so we can have more of a community feel. We'll also be using the chat for questions, so please type in your questions at any time, and I'll be fielding them to the speakers after the presentations. So I'll put my affiliation in there right now too. There we go. Okay, now I'd like to welcome our presenters. Jeff Rose is the Burns District Office Manager with the Oregon Bureau of Land Management, and will discuss why we do fuel breaks, types of fuel breaks, and fuel break considerations. Jolie Pollet is the Division Chief of Fire Planning and Fuels Management with the Bureau of Land Management, Fire and Aviation, and will discuss BLM fuel break policy and perspective. Duncan Leao is the Fuels and Vegetation Program Manager with the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest, and will discuss fuel break policy from the forest perspective in Nevada and how it relates to shared stewardship. Thank you all for joining us today. Oh, and before we get started, I would like to since we can't see each other, just a kind of a way to get to know each other a little better, I'm going to launch this poll about how your relationship to fuel breaks. So if you could answer the poll, that'd be great, and then I'll share the results. Looks like people have had equal experience with all the different types of fuel breaks we have listed here. All right, with about 75% of people answering, I'll go ahead and end the polling and share the results. So we've got a lot of people on who've managed fuel breaks, a lot who've studied them, and seems about equal, almost equal experience with the different types, maybe green strips winning a little bit. All right, thanks everybody. Okay, Jeff, now if you would like to share your screen.
Okay, Janae, this is the scary part, right?
Right. It worked before. All right, looks beautiful.
Oh, okay. All right, awesome. So the one thing I noticed is I can't see the chat, so if you could monitor that for me, let me know. But hey, thanks for the invite to come today and the opportunity to talk about fuel breaks. You know, fuel breaks can be an important part of our management strategy, and you know, they can help us address a lot of different issues that we have and challenges related to wildland fires across our landscape. But it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I hope in the next few minutes, hour or so that we have, and then some of the other sessions, is that we can provide information to help people kind of integrate them into their management scheme and apply them on the landscape where appropriate. So let me know when I advance here.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes that can be tricky, but if you hover in your bottom left corner, there's like a very faint little arrow.
Oh man, okay. Holy cow, it works. All
Yeah.
right. All right. Okay. So why are we looking at fuel breaks? And I think just looking at some numbers here, this is just a graph of number of fires since 1983. And since that time, we've kind of averaged somewhere between 55,000 and 65,000 fires annually. But then you move it and you look at number of acres burned, and the trend, which is the kind of the area graph behind the bars, is that you're looking at an increasing trend over the years. And at the simplest level is with about the same number of fires with increasing acres is you think all the fires are getting larger. And I think, you know, the reality is we're starting to pick up some really large fires, and we're starting to have some of those big fires more often. So what can we do to help mitigate that? And Jeremy Maestas, I saw him pop on. I like to quote him, and on this is the human nature is to try harder, and we have been making some strides by trying harder with more folks on the ground, changes in equipment, new equipment, bigger equipment, things like that. And again, as we've made some successes, but the trend is still continuing. So how can we kind of to get after this a little more effective manner? And I think about this kind of breaking it down into just the fire behavior, because that's one of the goals of fuel breaks is to alter fire behavior. So where can we do that? And go into the fire behavior triangle for wildland fires is there's 3 components to that. You have weather, topography, and fuels. And I'd like to be able to change the weather. I'm looking outside today right now, and it's kind of cloudy, and I'd like the snow to melt a little faster. But I don't think I can have that kind of decision space or that power, even as a district manager. The same with topography, as topography is pretty much set. But we can have an impact on the fuels, and just in terms of the amount of fuel, the arrangement, the continuity, and some other components. So we have been looking at doing that, but at what scale is we can't treat all the acres. So we have to start looking at it more in a strategic kind of manner. And that's where fuel breaks come in, because the fuel break is a strategically located feature that changes vegetation, and it slows the spread of fire and aids in the control. And I want to kind of make sure we're pretty specific about that, is that's what the goal is, to change the veg, to alter fire behavior, and to aid in the control. And Lance Okeson is a fuel specialist out of Idaho, and I fought fire with Lance a long time ago, and I think he breaks it down in a really good way. Is fuel breaks are about physics and logistics, is changing that fire behavior, and then aiding us in the movement of people and equipment to that site to be effective in a more safe manner. Fuel breaks are also a planned location, and this is actually just part of a map of the Holloway fire, which is a fire in Southeast Oregon. It was fairly large, and the blue lines are a representation of the dozer lines that were put in during that fire. And I look at those, and I talk with my folks, is that you really shouldn't expect things to get better under pressure or under stress. And those lines were put in for stopping the fire at the time. The pink is the fire perimeter, and you can see some of those lines match up, and some of them either are outside of the fire line or not. When we put those lines in, they made perfect sense at the time based on the information we had, but it was a very short time frame to make that. So when you're putting fuel breaks in, you have the ability to be planned, and they need to be based on the objectives and based on that firefighting need, is to reduce that flame length, to create that defensible space and safety for the firefighters there, provide the access. And the other feature I like to talk about too with people is the fuel breaks provide us an opportunity to be successful. They don't guarantee it, but they increase our chance for success in that location. And again, it comes down to that location, right? Is it location and landscape can be extremely important. And again, as being deliberate about where we put them is also critical to our success. A lot of times we forget to take advantage of what we're handed to on the ground. And when we're designing the fuel breaks and looking at where to put them, it's important to look at what you have. Are there roads, rivers, streams, lakes? You know, natural changes in vegetation. The top is a picture from the Southwest US of some fish and wildlife firefighters working off of a playa, and you know, a great place to tie into, and I guess in roads and other things that are there. But just because they're there doesn't mean we have to use them. Does it make sense? Do they meet our objectives? Are they the right location? Are they the right shape? Can they meet our needs? We had a fire up by Lincoln City this last year in Oregon. And, you know, the Pacific Ocean provides a really nice fuel break, but again, is that really the location, the spot that you want to go to? So the next question is, if they're there, can they be enhanced? And if they can, then again, another great opportunity to save you some time and effort to look at those. So when you're initially planning, look at what you're handed initially, and everything doesn't need to be created. But there are times when you do have to construct them, and there's a couple of different ways you can be done. This is talking about what I think people think of in their mind when you talk about a fuel break is the typical brown earth, bare soil. And the picture of the tractor plowing is from the Winnemucca district just south of us here. And they were working on a project along some roadsides there. But it's a very effective technique in certain locations to do this. You're removing all the vegetation. You're not having any burnable material in that fuel break, exposing it to mineral soil. There are some limitations if you're going to go this way, is that you probably need a soil type that doesn't have a lot of rocks or stones, or that make it easy to take that drill through, or that plow or the dozer line through. It's also an annual treatment is just the nature of the conditions here, is that we tend to get plants pretty opportunistic and they move back in. So you're looking at an annual maintenance or at least a biannual maintenance on a lot of these sites. I mentioned that it probably can stop some fires. Some of the lower flame length fires will run into these and stop, but it doesn't eliminate the risk of spotting. And often that, to be wide enough to take that risk out, these have to be a pretty significant feature with a fairly high level of disturbance. And again, it doesn't mean it's the wrong decision, but you have to look at all the factors and the restrictions you have on your landscape before you put this in. Another fuel break that you can find in some places, and I don't have very much experience with this because I need a little more trees in my part of the world to deal with this, is the shaded fuel break. And this is a graphic from Oregon State University on the top there that gives you a depiction of what a shaded fuel break looks like. And the bottom is a picture from Northern California. And what you're doing is you're coming in here and you're reducing a number of trees through the swath or through the fuel break. And then you remove the shrubs in the understory. And what you're doing is trying to get the fire down out of the canopy and down onto the ground. And again, it gives those firefighters a chance to be successful in that area. A little bit of cost savings is you're not taking every tree off of that landscape. And also you might be able to get some cost recovery if you have a timber product or even a pulp or some kind of other stewardship value on that ground. As we move into these more vegetated fuel breaks, it's important to remember that you're still leaving a burnable material on the ground, and you're not going to get a stop of the fire, but you're just changing that flame length or that character of the fire the physics of it to help the firefighter with suppression. Maintenance of these is 10 to 20 years is what some of the literature shows. I think anytime we talk about maintenance of any of the fuel breaks, it depends a lot on your location and your weather and in the climate and then just the annual cycle of precip and some other things that will do that. But you have to monitor it and check it and make sure it's not a one-shot treatment. You definitely have to keep coming back to maintain those benefits. Mowing is another mechanical treatment that we can use. And we've done quite a bit of that here on our district and a lot of the neighbors. And it's using a heavy duty mower or brush beater. The one in the picture there is a 14-foot mower and making multiple swaths. We've done a bunch along roadsides here, taking advantage of that natural or that existing feature in the landscape. This one's along a 2-track road that we have, but you're taking the vegetation down to about a foot and again, using that mower to knock that veg back. Again, it's really nice and the operators really appreciate it if there's not a lot of rock on the surface. That tends to increase breakage of the machinery and loosens the teeth of the operator when they hit them. The litter mat can be a conducive environment for invasive annuals, and we found that a herbicide treatment along with this can really help increase the length of effectiveness of the mowed break. You also can go in and seed some of those locations, but if the litter left is not providing challenges to getting the drill seed in the ground. Maintenance 3 to 5 years. In the sagebrush is killed, doesn't sprout, but when you're only cutting it down to a foot, is it leaves some of the lower branches there, and again they take off after being mowed, and you have to keep an eye on it, and your effectiveness starts to drop off after that initial 3 to 5 year window. Another kind of planted fuel break, and these you replace the vegetation with a more desirable plant of some kind, something that's not as burnable, something that has an extended green period compared to the adjacent vegetation. Something that has a large personal space, I like to think of it that way. And of course, in kind of the world we live in now with social distancing, maybe something with a good social distance, meaning that it occupies the space with a lot of bare ground around it. Again, is to break up that continuity is in the fuels. Because it's vegetated, again, is there may be conditions where fire does move across this, so you probably want a plant that is also adapted to a little bit of fire moving over the top of it. Maintenance is 2 to 3 years on some of these. It could be longer. Again, with a herbicide treatment or possibly livestock, is you can increase the length of effectiveness with those. If you're gonna graze this intentionally, is selecting the plant species that would be tolerant of grazing use would also be important. There's a lot of discussion out about native versus introduced material, and I think it comes down to the objectives of the site. There are native plants that fit the bill in these areas, and I think there are certain locations where that's what should be used, and there's other locations where the introduced species may be more appropriate. But I think it comes down to what the objectives of that landscape are, and also requirements. There's maybe some legal requirements, and then it comes down to availability of seed. I know in our area there's an increased effort trying to develop native seed, but it's still at times a challenge to get it, to get the supply and get it at a cost that's not prohibitive. But again, it doesn't mean that it's not appropriate or not the right choice. I think it just depends on the objectives of that site. Something else that we've done a little bit here on, and it was just a kind of a happenstance and kind of an accident that we started doing it is we're using herbicides in primarily plateau from an airplane, a fixed wing aircraft, along roadsides on either side of the road. And it provides us with a pretty good fuel break. We haven't had an opportunity to really test it with fire, but visually it's showing good results. The photo on the bottom is from the Miller Homestead fire, and that's actually an area that was natural recovery. We didn't seed it, and we went down each side of the road, an existing road, with the spray plane. And you can see the difference. The difference is primarily cheatgrass in that location and thinning it out. And I think we achieved the objective. We just haven't had a chance to test it out. You could couple that with a seeding treatment in areas, and you might show a higher level of success with that. Maintenance is 2 to 3 years, and we find the herbicide effects tend to decline pretty quickly after the 3rd year. Thing I didn't mention before too is that if you are going to seed into these areas, another consideration of a plant would be something that can compete in that environment with invasive annuals. Last one I'll just touch briefly on, because I know you're going to have a whole session on later on grazed, on targeted grazing or outcome-based grazing. Is grazed fuel breaks is from things I've seen and some of our experience here on the district, is they're best used in areas that are dominated by herbaceous vegetation. As the amount of shrubs increases in that system, is your effectiveness of the grazing animal tends to decrease, just because you still have a fairly significant fuel left on site. Can be applied in rocky, steep areas. You might need to add some additional developments and some infrastructure, fences or water or mineral sites with using livestock. And I think it also, you have the added complexity of another organism out there with its own minds, and just keeping it where you want it to be is going to be another management option or challenge that you have to address. There are a number of pilot projects going underway in Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, Utah too has done some things. So hopefully more will come on this, and I'd be interested to hear what the session is coming up. So considerations and trade-offs, I think when you're looking at putting these on the landscape from the management sense, is that there are environmental trade-offs. And I think if you think of fire as an animal, right, and you're looking to restrict its movement across the landscape, as you're looking at fragmenting that habitat, you're going to kind of fragment its area. But there's other animals that use the landscape too, and does that fragmentation affect them? And at what level it is, and what are those trade-offs? You're increasing access, which is one of the goals of the fuel break, and it's access for firefighters. But it's not just the firefighters that access it. There's other people that now have the ability to get in there, and what are the effects of that? There's other social and cultural issues that Native Americans are concerned and have expressed some concern in certain times about what these fuel breaks might or do to some of the resources, both physical and metaphysical. And I think we have to try to talk and figure out what that means. And the next thing I think is to really pay attention to is, it's not just a line in space. It needs to connect into something. And this is driven home to me by a lot of our fuel specialists, is just a line out in the middle of the sagebrush doesn't really do us much. Where does it connect in? Where does it meet that objective? And then the post-treatment management is also critical. Is what we do after we apply the treatment, is that going to help to maintain it, or is that going to provide provide us with a challenge in terms of increasing the time or decreasing the time to when we have to do maintenance. And then the monitoring of how long is it taking, and are we getting the objectives that we need. I think we do really well with measuring the plant response following the treatment, but I think we need to do a little more work with where they're hitting, where we're actually seeing effects of the landscape or of the fire hitting into these features. Is they've been documented at certain points, but it'd be interesting to know what some of the benefits are based on some of just the basic fire stuff that we're looking at. Just as final thoughts I have, oops, I went backwards. Okay, final thoughts. I had an FMO here when I first started. He goes, Jeff, all fires start small. And they're right? That's kind of an obvious statement. But some do get big, and it's difficult to tell when you're standing on that small fire if it's really going to get big sometimes. And sometimes it's really obvious, but it's not always obvious when they start. Another thing I'd like to really point out is that firefighters stop fires, and fuel breaks help firefighters stop fires. But in and themselves, they are not going to be the solution, and you just can't put them in and then walk away. Is that they need to be coupled with a bigger effort, and that comes down to designing at the appropriate scale and being part of that larger program, being placed strategically and with in mind that provides us a safer location to be successful in. And then 2 to 3% of all the fires is the number that we use to about the ones that get really large. And I think of fuel breaks as kind of like a breakwater or a seawall, and that most of the time they work really well. But there are situations and conditions that you can't design a fuel break to handle all situations, and you can end up with a fire that overwhelms that fuel break, and it can happen. So again, these fuel breaks provide us with the opportunity. They don't guarantee success. And I think that being strategic and being part of a larger scheme will help us increase that level of success. But I think we have to be honest with folks, saying that it is not the line in the sand that we would like it to be. But again, it's just an opportunity to be successful. So Janae, I don't know if we have if this is the time for questions, or you'd like to just move, I'll stop.
Yeah, I think I'll hold all questions till the end, but you do have, so please, if you have questions for Jeff, you can type them into the chat box, and Jeff, you're welcome to look at them. Oh yeah, that's right, you don't have a chat box.
Well, I can see it now.
Okay.
I've stopped sharing, so.
So you're welcome to respond to people if you want, but we'll also respond after all the presentations live. So it's up to you what you want to do. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was wonderful. And now, Jolie, I will bring up your slides.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, crossing fingers. I've had really unstable internet because I came to the office, which was a mistake. I should have stayed home. All right, and I'm kind of toggling between a couple screens here when I was trying to do my internet fixes. So anyway, I'll try and keep us in order, Jeannie. So thank you for running the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a little bit of a BLM perspective on fuel breaks. Jeff gave a great overview. Let me give a little bit of more insight into what they are, why do we do them, and kind of some complexities and challenges associated with implementing a network of fuel breaks. So we'll move to the next slide. So even though there's a lot of chatter about wildfire, and certainly a lot of chatter about wildfire in the West, it's usually discussed in the context of forest fire. But in actuality, there's more acres that burn in non-forested systems in the West than burn in forested systems. So we have more acres of wildfire in non-forested lands. But yet most of that attention on wildfires is still related to forested systems, and wildfire solutions that Congress proposes and others are decidedly forest-centric. And for the Department of the Interior, for these federal lands, almost 75% of the lands that burn are in non-forested vegetation types. And there's just really been a historical lack of focus on wildfire in these lower elevation ecosystems. But we have all seen the damage that invasive species can do to these lower elevation landscapes. And even a small percentage of cheatgrass can significantly raise the risk of wildfire in these locations. And here in this graphic, you can see the warmer colors. And the warmer colors, this is kind of a fire departure picture graphic. And the cooler colors are showing where there's a lack of fire in the landscape. So that coincides with the messaging that we need to restore fire, or we need to reintroduce fire, or ramp up prescribed fire. But there's a significant portion of the West, and these are in the warmer colors, where there's already too much fire compared to historical norms. So these warm colors are areas where introducing prescribed fire or allowing natural fire to burn is actually problematic. And we don't want to see more fire on the landscape here. So when you hear this term, yeah, we need to restore fire to the landscape, we need to do more prescribed fire, that's something Congress has been talking about, needing to do more prescribed fire. It's actually much more nuanced, and it's not appropriate where we've got uncharacteristic fire of too frequent fire on a significant portion of the landscape. This also happens to be a lot of the BLM footprint because it happens to coincide with these lower elevation areas, and also you see a big blob in Southern California as well. But anyway, just setting this whole stage, setting this issue into context. Okay, next slide. And as Jeff talked about, most of these fires, they all start small, and most of them actually stay relatively small, less than 10,000 acres or so. But in a lot of the areas in the West, especially in the lower elevation areas, we are seeing these mega size fires. We are breaking records every year, every other year. So in 2020, there was a wildfire outside of Elko, Nevada, the Martin Fire, that turned into Nevada's largest wildfire ever, 400,000 acres in just a few days. These lower elevation fires are not as costly to suppress compared to some large forest fires, but they can severely impact and, in a sense, destroy landscapes, in a matter of days. And we're not talking a matter of weeks and months the way we are with kind of forest fires, but these are areas that can be catastrophically impacted, 400, 500, 600,000 acres in just a matter of several days. So these are really impactful fires, and they're getting larger. The graphic here is showing wildfire acreages from 1960 to 79. And this is all in the Great Basin, and then 1980 to 1999, and then 2000 to 2018. So this fire frequency and size is steadily increasing, and our fire suppression resources, not only, they are the ones that stop the fires, as Jeff points out, but historically, they were responding to fires on these landscapes every 25 to 50 years. They weren't the same landscapes burning over and over. Well, once invasives get in the picture, these same areas are now burning every 5 to 10 years, sometimes even more frequently. And it's just really, when they're burning that frequently, it's really hard to get on top of the post-fire recovery needs, and they burn faster than they can recover, and putting that area at greater risk of invasives or undesirable plant species. Okay, next slide. So the BLM, a few years ago, started to develop a programmatic EIS, the Great Basin Fuel Breaks Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, to help facilitate the development of a strategic network of fuel breaks across this landscape. These fuel breaks are needed to help reduce the size and extent of these uncharacteristic frequent wildfires and large wildfires. The PEIS analyzed 11,000 miles of fuel breaks. That's a lot of miles of fuel breaks over a lot of acres. The analysis, I don't think presumed that we would be implementing 11,000 miles of fuel breaks, but it does kind of have, it kind of sets the stage for implementation of a subset of these miles for fuel breaks. In reality, the BLM is annually implementing about 700 to 800 miles of new fuel breaks and maintaining another 300 to 400 miles of fuel breaks, which is still a lot. And we have received some criticism and by creating more fuel breaks in this programmatic EIS, did get some feedback from the public, interested public about, hey, is this too much on the landscape? But there's concerns that with these larger, with more fuel breaks, that it's actually introducing opportunities for increased establishment of invasives. But part of this policy, part of the programmatic EIS and just part of normal BLM policy is that we monitor these fuel breaks and vegetation. And typically we are implementing and placing fuel breaks in areas where we already have an increase in the fire frequency, and we've already got increased wildfire risks due to the vegetation, or preponderance of human-caused fires, say like around along the interstate, those kinds of places. And typically we're implementing these fuel breaks that are where they're already disturbed. So these aren't in pristine habitats with all intact native plant communities. That's not typically where we're going to be installing these fuel breaks. So they're going to be, they're already in areas that have had disturbance and that are higher risk of wildfire. And the fuel breaks have been, we've been getting more attention on this network of fuel breaks, starting with the Obama administration. That was supported through the Trump administration. And although this administration hasn't weighed in on specifically about fuel treatment or fuel breaks, we expect there to be support to continue this kind of work. There's not necessarily funding to do a whole lot more, but this is, something, I guess, a suite of projects that we intend to continue into the future. We don't see this stopping. Okay, next slide. So why are we putting in these fuel breaks? And Jeff talked about this, that we listened to our suppression resources, and they shared that they felt like the fuel breaks are one of the few tools in our toolbox that can help them safely and effectively respond to wildfires. So we know that we've been doing fuel breaks for a long time, and depending on the definition, there's a whole suite of definition of fuel breaks. Jeff talked a lot about that. In the context of the programmatic EIS, these are linear fuel breaks, typically along already created linear features like roads, primarily roads, but there could be power lines and things like that included in there. So we feel like this is one tool in the toolbox to kind of help us get around this problem of too frequent wildfire that continue to burn more frequently than they should and keep growing larger and larger as the years go on. Okay, slide 6. So we know that fuel breaks are an imperfect solution to a really complex, challenging, gnarly set of problems. We listen to our firefighters. They say that they feel like the fuel breaks present a place on the landscape where they can be effective in preventing the growth of these large fires, can serve as an anchor point to control wildfires. Fuel breaks don't usually stop fires on their own, although through our monitoring, occasionally they actually do. But mostly they're there as an aid to wildfire suppression resources. So we do actually have one anecdotal story, and we've got some data about it, but a fuel break in Idaho that did, with the aid of fire retardant, all they had was fire retardant, and they could see the fuel break, and it did kind of stop the fire. And then eventually the fire suppression resources got there and helped support that that line there. But typically it's just an opportunity to either slow the spread, or so we can get resources in place, or as a line that we can, as a line for safety for firefighters to go in and do their job. Like Jeff talked about, that's really what stops fires, our firefighters, and with their equipment. And we really wish we didn't have this problem of these really large and more frequent wildfires. We're in a bad place ecologically. Climate change is not helping the situation. We can expect to see, with climate change, we are expecting to see more wildfire activity in a lot of places. And, this is not we would love to be able to just restore all these lands to some kind of native habitat or native component. We just don't have the resources and the ability to do that over a lot of these invaded landscapes. So they're kind of our best chance of helping break the cycle of frequent fire and for protecting high value areas. We've been putting in fuel breaks into some of our where we've got fires burning every 5 to 10 years, and we've gone in and invested in post-fire emergency stabilization or burned area recovery vegetation treatments. We've actually been putting in fuel breaks in some of those areas to help protect those investments, knowing that this is in an area that fire is burning pretty frequently. So we're also trying to use these fuel breaks to protect that investment. And we're always seeking new solutions and technology to address these large landscape problems. We wish there was a silver bullet and an easy fix, but there's not. And getting better at initial attack isn't probably going to happen. We're already at 95 to 98% of the fires that we're putting out, we are able to suppress before they get to be 10,000 acres or more. And so there just really aren't many other alternatives to reduce the impacts that these small percent of the fires that escape initial attack pose to the ecology and ecosystem components in these areas. So we know that there are impacts, and it really just comes down to a local discussion about the trade-offs between the potential fuel break impacts, and we consider things like habitat for wildlife. There's some, in some of these areas, there's some sensitive species, plant species, and animal species. So we're always talking about this local discussion about the trade-offs between the potential benefits of the fuel break versus the impacts and the trade-offs with large fire risk. So in areas where we don't have a risk of large fires, we're probably not going to be investing in fuel break as the tool, as a fuel management tool. And in those areas, we would be using a different tool to kind of get at those problems. Okay, next slide. So kind of the next steps that, related to this is that we're going to continue with messaging about the purpose and functionality of the fuel breaks, where they're most appropriate and where they are not an appropriate treatment. We're not talking about forging new disturbed areas in areas of intact habitat, for example. So these are, we have to put these in the right place. They need to be placed strategically, and that's where partnerships come in. The networks of fuel breaks need to be planned and implemented collaboratively and with partners. And then we need to continue to invest and use science. So we need to figure out where fuel breaks are most needed, where they'll be most effective, how to place them so they minimize other impacts or don't minimize those unintended consequences, and then continue with monitoring and adaptive management associated with fuel breaks so we can learn from the work we've done and then adapt. And that's really all that I had.
Great, thank you so much, Jolie. Again, if you have questions for Jolie, please type them in the chat and we'll get to the questions at the end. So Duncan, if you are ready.
Yeah. Thanks for having me today. Again, my name is Duncan Leao. I work for the Humboldt-Toiyabe National Forest. I'm the Forest Fuels and Vegetation Program Manager. So I'll offer a little Forest Service perspective, and then I'll also offer up some of our discussions and activities going on in Nevada with our Nevada Shared Stewardship. So it's nice to go last. All the information from Jeff and Jolie is a great background, great information as to how you know the Forest Service and other partners go about design for fuel breaks. Fuel breaks, again, you know, just emphasizing again, our big considerations for where and why we put those in our fuels, weather, topography. And then I'd also like to add fire history and fire cause. You know, what's your fire environment? And Jolie showed that for many areas in the Great Basin, if you go back to that map she was showing in your mind, there's a lot of red in the northeast end of Nevada and other areas in the Great Basin where you've got an altered fire regime and an altered fuels and vegetation condition. Not all fuel breaks are along roadsides. It just happens to be that roads are great access and also great points for suppression activity and suppression strategies. We also need to consider when we put fuel breaks in, what response times are to the fire. Some areas we don't have fire resources nearby, or they may be a three hour drive away to respond to that fire. We also have to consider future maintenance and our future funding and what that looks like. You know, what the interval or frequency is that we need to go back into some of these fuel breaks and do some level of retreatment. And that's going to be dictated by that fuels and veg type. We have to also recognize that most fuels treatments, including fuel breaks, you know, aren't designed for those extreme weather and fire events where you know, we're experiencing 50+ mile/hour winds and fire rates of spread that don't necessarily allow for ground or air resources to respond quite effectively. A lot of our treatments are designed for 90th to 95th percentile conditions, and that's gonna cover a lot, and that's why we're so effective at utilizing fuel breaks and responding to fires. Just looking at what else in my notes here. Fuel breaks do work, and we do have many examples of that in Nevada, most of which are on BLM lands. Generally speaking, the BLM lands are the lower elevations, and then you get into some of the Forest Service lands where we are up a little higher in elevation, and a lot of the fire starts depending on the seasonality, phenology of what's growing there. Earlier in the season, the lower elevations fuels are very receptive. Fuel breaks in Nevada, we're looking at, you know, lots of discussion and a little bit of history, you know, kind of dating back. I would say the Forest Service hasn't utilized fuel breaks as much as BLM has for some of those reasons I mentioned prior. And we also have to look at what the values at risk are and why we're using them. Several years ago, both Forest Service and BLM went through our FIAT process, so our fire invasive and assessment tool or team, to identify where the values are across the landscape, and what fire looks like moving forward. A lot of that was tied into management for greater sage grouse. With that FIAT process, there were numerous fuel breaks identified, and many opportunities for future implementation of fuel breaks. Fast forwarding today, we're recognizing that fire is the greatest disturbance factor on our landscapes. And so I guess we're 2 years ago, 2019, there's an initiative through what's called Shared Stewardship, and I believe a lot of folks are familiar with this. It's not necessarily a new way of thinking, but it's additional cross-boundary look at designing, planning, and implementing treatments to reduce wildfire risk, and then also for restoration activities. So our Nevada Shared Stewardship Agreement was signed in 2019. Again, it's focused on that cross-boundary approach. Fire knows no boundaries, and we've got multiple jurisdictions and communities that are impacted by fire. The focus of Nevada's Shared Stewardship Agreement is to reduce the threat posed by wildfires to all the various values at risk, with a goal of increasing the number of acres treated by 50% by 2025. Through all the various modeling and data sets that we've had available to us, we identified 13 landscapes across Nevada. And these were identified as priority landscapes to reduce that wildfire threat to the values. And when I speak of values, it's all encompassing high priority values such as wildlife habitat, communities, watersheds, recreation, etc. So I'm gonna just pull up on my screen if I can figure that out. Just an example of fuel breaks being used in shared stewardship and in Nevada. So the Nevada Shared Stewardship is comprised of the federal and state agencies. There's an executive committee that steers projects and makes decisions on these focus areas, focusing on, again, high priority landscapes. This, if you guys can see, I'm guessing you guys can see my map here. This is the Elko Spring Creek Lamoille priority landscape. It's one of the 2 higher priority landscapes for shared stewardship in Nevada. And what you're seeing here on the screen is the landscape outlined here in green. You've got Elko and Spring Creek here, and then Interstate 80. I think most folks know the area. And then you've got this end of the Ruby Mountains. And there's also another priority landscape on both sides of the Ruby Mountains and south of the Ruby Mountains. But for 2021, projects were identified, and a lot of these projects that we see here in red are both existing and new fuel breaks, mostly on BLM lands, and some of which actually tie into the programmatic EIS that Jolie was mentioning. So these, again, are designed for interrupting fire spread and allowing fire suppression to be more safe and effective. I won't go into detail on every one of these fuel breaks or projects, but a lot of them contain an element of mowing, followed up by drill seeding. And then again, in this landscape, fire has been a great influencer in what's going on the vegetation. So some of these areas are really, really homogeneous fuels types, and some of them have even converted to annual invasive grasses. So I just pulled up on the layers here with this product, just kind of an idea on the general communities in relation to the landscape. And then if I can just pull up here the fire history. Okay, maybe not. Well, regardless, this is one example in Nevada's shared stewardship for the use of fuel breaks, and it will continue to be probably an emphasis moving forward is fuel breaks in relation to all of our other restoration activities as projects move forward from now over the next few years. In the rest of the Great Basin and in the other shared stewardship areas in Utah and Idaho, fuel breaks are also another component for how they manage shared stewardship and priorities that are identified in there as well. I won't go into detail on those. I'm not the subject matter expert there. So that's what I wanted to share today, and I think Janae, we can take any questions or move accordingly.
Great. Thank you so much, Duncan. And I don't think I mentioned to everyone in the introduction, but Darren Turner wasn't able to make it at the last minute, and Duncan stepped in, and we really appreciate you stepping in and sharing your perspective. Thanks. So now we'll take questions. I know we have just a few minutes, so if you have to leave, I understand. We can get your questions answered after the fact as well, but I'll just step right in and start with the first question, which was for Jeff Rose, which he kind of answered a little bit in the chat, but any general stats on cost per acre or cost per mile of a fuel break? Appreciating varied costs in light or heavier fuels. Great presentation.
You know, Janae, I hate to give any numbers for a couple of reasons. One is I just can't pull on the top of my head, but if they want to send me an email, we'll try to dig it up. But depends on so many factors in the location. You know, Jolie over in Boise will pay a whole lot less than I will over in Burns just because of mobilization cost. If I'm going to contract or if I'm going to rent, if I own the tractor, it's a whole lot less. You know, numbers, you know, from anywhere from 5 miles to 60 or $5 to $60 a mile is what you're looking at. Just that's how much of a variation it is. So again, is do the research and figure it out, and then do the estimates.
Great, thank you. Next question, in rangelands, will fuel break design include looking at proposed fuel break locations relative to a level of invasion in the area, and whether the fuel break will be connecting invaded to uninvaded areas? And will it discuss ecological management trade-offs with invasive species, land managers, and partners in that area?
I'll take a stab at that. So, you know, the programmatic EIS is, I was talking a lot about that in my presentation, and it's a programmatic EIS, which means that there'll need to be additional analysis for actually siting and implementing a new fuel break, even though a lot of the cumulative effects and a lot of that's covered in that programmatic EIS. But yeah, those are all things that will be considered before a fuel break is established on the ground. And certainly part of the things that we monitor once a fuel break is implemented.
Great, thank you. Next question, does anyone have thoughts on topographic locations of fuel breaks and what works best from a firefighting perspective? For example, ridge lines versus behind ridge lines.
You know, ridge lines are always the best spot. You know, the worst spots are always mid-slope, but I think they're always not the opportunity. In some of the modeling, I see you got a session on modeling coming up too. I think just understanding what those are and where you're going to go. kind of comes back to the size, where how big does it need to be, and how much space do I have? So I think most folks on the ground will tell you that ridge lines would be definitely the place to go, but they're not always available. So you have to kind of look at what else is there, and what can you use. The other thing to consider too is just adjacent vegetation. That also affects it too.
Great, thank you. Next question, in sagebrush, bitterbrush, the only time we have a major fire is when there are strong winds, with ember sometimes spotting a mile or more ahead. How wide does a fuel break need to be effective? And Jeff, I think I saw that you answered part of this.
Yeah, it's like everything else, it depends, right? And Jolie had a nice answer too in there above that. So, but I think they used to talk about, I put in the chat that we used to talk about the average worst day is as a term, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, other than you can't plan for everything, and ideally you want it as wide as you possibly can get it. But again, it depends on the adjacent vegetation. What are the ecological trade-offs that you're looking at, the social trade-offs? And then it comes down to the manager's risk. To me as a district manager or as a decision maker, what's the level of risk I'm willing to assume based on what I think that will provide me, and how much safety and security will it provide the firefighters and increase their chances of success. So again, all those things, numbers being thrown around right now, 100 to 300 feet in that system. Like I said, I would work my fuel specialist to figure out what the modeling tells me, and then go from there. One size does not fit all, for sure. And just because it's 300 feet in one location doesn't mean that later on down the line it wouldn't be 50 feet. It just depends.
Great, thanks. Jolie, did you want to add something, or was that good?
That was great. Thanks, Jeff.
Next question, this is for Duncan. You said there are many examples of fuel breaks working in Nevada. Are there summaries and data, or where are the summaries and data located? Are they shared?
I'm not necessarily the keeper of those, and I'm willing to bet you have some of those. I've seen some white papers for some of the recent fires in the last few years around Winnemucca area and even Elko. I would have to look for those, of course. But looking at those white papers, and then also speaking with some of our suppression folks, operations folks, they have been utilizing those fuel breaks in how they go about their short and long-term planning in managing those incidents. So that's, the fire, the fuel break itself may not, stop the fire. They may be using those as great safe anchor points for holding burnout operations, and then also moving crew resources around. But we do have some examples out there, and I apologize if I don't have those off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I believe it's until last webinar, we'll have a successes webinar. So I know we'll have one from Carson City, and I think some from Idaho. So stay tuned. Next question, sounded like that big west-wide project has already established an optimal network of breaks, but Jolie mentioned we still need ongoing science effort in citing them. Could you clarify to what extent this is an open question?
Well, I talked about kind of the focus on forest fires and forest fire research. There's not been a lot of research or science related to the siting or even in some ways efficacy of fuel breaks in certain vegetation types. So we've got a little bit of research. So I think, we're always looking to learn more and to be adaptive into how we're doing this. And even though we've identified a network of fuel breaks. They're not practical to implement across a huge landscape. So they're not actually there across a large landscape. So, you know, Duncan pointed out an area that's got a strategic network of fuel breaks, and the same thing if we were kind of, there's some other ecosystems or geographies where we're also looking to kind of put in a strategic network of fuel breaks, but there's really not a strategic network across the West. But we're kind of doing it in areas where we've got the highest.
Great, thank you. And I think maybe Jolie, you could speak to this next question too. It's similar. It was stated that most fuel breaks are put along existing roads and disturbances, but not always. So what, how do different states, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on it briefly, but not in much detail. It depends on what you call a fuel break. There's no standard definition. So BLM's been doing fuel breaks in one form or another since the National Fire Plan, you know, since 2000. So what I was talking about was a linear fuel break. That's what was analyzed in the programmatic EIS. That's typically what BLM will be implementing. That's the tool that we would be using in invaded rangelands that are invaded with annual invasives like cheatgrass. So that's typical kind of fuel treatment, typical kind of BLM landscape, but fuel breaks can be used all over and for various reasons. And I just said typically they're along already disturbed linear features because that's really where it's cost effective and where we have access to get in fire suppression resources to access those fuel breaks.
Great, thank you. Next question, what efforts have been made to co-locate, coordinate planned and existing fuel breaks with power line corridors and right-of-ways?
I got a little bit to add on that one. Lisa, Nevada, NV Energies are a big producer there. Lots of recent discussions in the last couple of years with them on, you know, implementing treatments both within the right-of-way and then outside of the right-of-way, providing a more resilient corridor from and for wildfire. So, you know, both looking at, you know, a start as a result of the power line, and then also a fire coming from outside into that corridor. So just overall, those discussions are pretty recent in the last year or two, but they do have a plan and in place or strategy, and also are required by state law to begin implementing this. So those areas right now are kind of tiered by hazard area and priority, with a focus along the Sierra Front and down in southern Nevada and the Spring Mountains.
Great, thanks so much. Well, we are a little bit over time, and so I want to be respectful of our presenters' time. There are a few more questions, but we will try to answer those. We will save the chat and try to get those questions answered after the webinar. So I just want to say thank you all. Great discussion. Thank you for your participation. Attendees, we'd appreciate it if you would take our 3-question survey that will appear after I close the webinar. And the recording of this webinar will be posted on our Great Basin Fire Science YouTube channel within the next few days, and the link will be automatically sent to you through a Zoom follow-up email. If you have further questions regarding this or other webinars, please call or email me anytime or check out our website. Again, thank you all for attending this webinar, and thank you so much, Jeff, Jolie, and Duncan for presenting this great information for us today. All right, have a great day, everybody.